Hi everyone. I guess we can start now. So welcome to AI for CCAM, the event about securing trust in AI for automated vehicles. So BVA Excite is happy to be part of this consortium. This is a European research project. We're going to tell you more in a minute. But today's webinar is really about securing trust in the AI for automated vehicles. So trust, it goes through how do we capture emotions and psychological reactions in terms of levers and barriers for the adoption of such vehicles. So today, there will be four of us. So myself, I will animate the discussion with Arnaud Gottlieb, who is the coordinator of this European research project that is called AI for CCAM, so artificial intelligence for connected, cooperative and automated mobility. So he works at the Similar Research Lab. But also, Lucie Regereau will tell us more about the methodology, who is the director of the Qualitative Factory at BVA Excite, and Isabelle Vallée, in charge of the analysis, who will tell us more about the results. But so before, I'd like to leave the floor to Arnaud, who will tell us a word about the project.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to be part of this seminar this morning. So I work for Similar Research Laboratory, which is a research organization, research lab dedicated to computer science and information technologies in Norway. So I'm speaking now from Oslo. And I'm also the coordinator of this large project funded by the European Commission, AI for CCAM, which is dedicated to trustworthy AI in connected, cooperative, automated mobility. And the goal in that project is basically to consider that AI and to see AI as the driving engine of autonomy in automated driving. And because of that, it's legitimate to develop, to understand, to focus on how we can develop trustworthy AI, which means AI that can be reliable, transparent, fair, that ensure diversity, that is explainable for automated driving and self-driving cars. Basically, the seminar of this morning is dedicated to user acceptance of automated driving. And we believe that it's a crucial topic that needs to be addressed. And I'm very proud of seeing BVA having taken this as a challenge to better understand, to better understand what we can do for a better user acceptance of automated driving. Thank you very much, Mark. I will then give you back the floor.
Thank you, Arnaud. That's a great introduction to the whole project and how we integrated this research project. So we conducted first a desk research on ethical, social, economical, and cultural requirements for AV adoption, with a great help from our partners from BSC, so the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, that had a much stronger focus on ethical requirements. And so now what we're going to see today is the qualitative research on levers and barriers to adoption. And when you say the goal is really to understand what it means to have user acceptance, it's really this that we try to do in this phase. It's really about understanding. So today we're going to try to understand what are the emotions that foster levers and that can also drive some barriers to adoption. We also are to conduct a quantitative research on these levers and barriers, but I'll tell you more about that at the end. Today, it's really about understanding these levers and barriers to adoption. So just before I interview my other colleagues, Lucie and Isabelle, I just want to say that you can write the questions. So I don't know if you're familiar with the live storm to the audience, but you can use the chat, but also there's a tab question, so you can write your questions there, and we have sessions to answer these questions. So first, I would like to ask Lucie about the methodology, and so we try to understand levers and barriers to adoption. I'd like to know, Lucy, who in particular did you interview for this research?
So for this quality phase, we decided to interview people who were all owners and users of car, either purchase or lease, of course. That is to say that they used their car daily on a daily basis or several times per week. They lived in Paris or Berlin or Warsaw. So there were only the capitals of this country, with a mix of men driving attitudes, as you may know. Some people were more utilitarian, which means that they drive mostly for because they had to. Some people who were more hedonic, who drive for fun and sensation, and people who were more symbolic, that is to say they like their car for social influence and representation, mostly. They were equally split between each city, with a mix of men and women. Some of them were did also cycle, at least occasionally. All of them were familiar with technology and had connected devices either at home or in their car. We had some, half of our sample was tech enthusiasts. That is to say, they tend to buy new technologies as soon as they are released. For instance, in our sample, we had people who were equipped with several connected devices, such as connected fridges, connected air purifier, full connected homes, of course, and they were the tech enthusiasts, and we are people who are more, half of the sample was more tech moderates. These ones were more describing themselves as followers, like mainstream tech users. They had some of them had some smart speakers or smartwatch, but that's it. We didn't have any tech reject.
Okay, I see. So you clearly made choices here. I'm wondering, and probably the audience too, why did you choose to focus mainly on this population? What are the choices that justified? What are the reasons that justified this choice?
You're right. It was a conviction we had. We knew that in order to get an extended feedback on our topic, especially regarding emotions, we needed to have people who were all urban drivers because of living in the capitals. So it means that they were already used to moving in a complex environment that can generate emotion, especially sometimes bad ones, but they are used to heavy traffics, road works, road signs. Many things happen on the roads in this context. We can find also a high diversity of contexts in big cities, such as, of course, cyclists, pedestrians. Sometimes these people are public transportation users as well, so they can meet these other users and they can be these users as well themselves. It was one of our principles, the way we decided to do it. Another one was the fact that they were all familiar with ADAS and connected devices. So they were, we wanted people who were already used to, for instance, cruise control, speed limiter, auto parking. They knew these technologies, they trusted them, in order to get people who would be quite open to AI and able to imagine what the barriers, of course, but also the levers could be for tomorrow. Maybe one limit of our research, we had only people who were able-bodied people. So it means that we would need to do another research in order to get the potential barriers and levers for people with physical disabilities. We know that there are some literature on this topic. For instance, one from written by Bennett, you can see.
Okay, so from what I understand, you didn't cover some minorities, which makes sense because you cannot do everything and its opposite in one sample. What I see from your response is that your goal is really to deep dive and have some extended feedback. So the objective behind it was to collect emotions. How did you do that? What in particular did you put into place? I think there was a lot of thinking behind the methodology, different ways, whether it is what you show, whether it is the the way you interviewed. Can you tell us more about that?
You're right, Mark, because beyond the sample, we had some techniques as well, some principles regarding our approach in order to get as many emotions as possible. So first, we selected some situations with the consortium in order to make it easier for respondents to immerse themselves in a context. As you can see, you have some pictures of cars and pedestrians as well. We had another principle which was an instruction. In this context, we told respondents that they couldn't take back control over the system. It was a way to have a common basis in order to explore the diversity of the emotional reactions in this specific context. It was one way, a first principle. The second one was the stimuli. People were exposed to stimuli such as sounds from the city and representations, that is to say visuals and videos of automated vehicles. So we had some real concept cars. We had some futuristic designs generated by AI. We had some videos. For instance, we had the driverless taxi in the US to show it to respondents. This again was made to investigate, to deep dive in the feelings and people's reactions. We had paired interviews to favor their reactions. So to be clear, we had the first phase where people were interviewed individually, and then we had people who were gathered by paired. So we had paired interviews in a second time with the same respondents. The idea of the individual interview was to avoid any auto-censorship. Then we gathered people according to their attitudes towards technologies. I told you that in our sample, we had some tech enthusiasts, we had some tech moderates. So here we decided to have some paired interviews with people who are both tech enthusiasts, both tech moderates, and one of each, in order to get as many barriers and levels as possible. And lastly, we used Dixit cards that you may have heard about. It's a card game, an international one used in our countries that were Poland, Germany, and France. It's a playful material that helps people to express their feelings, their reactions, and it was really helpful in this research, as it may not be that easy for people to immerse themselves in this kind of new technologies.
Thank you, Lucy. That's very clear. So we've seen how you designed the methodology and the research. Now I'm gonna share the floor with Isabelle. But just before that, there's an article that was recently published because, as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're running a literature review before the qualitative, but it is actually ongoing. And before looking into the results, I want to open with a recently published article by Tatiana Nazir from CNRS, which is also the CNRS, one of the partners of the consortium. And this article comes from a statement that she made. It's the fact that in the 2010s, a lot of experiments with robots and notably social assistants, let's say in hospitals or in museums. She noticed that some of the robots could be assaulted by humans, attacked. And the idea behind it was, okay, we see that there's, this fear of robots attacking humans, Skynet, etc. But we need also to ask ourselves, how can robots be socially accepted? And the research was exactly about that with social assistants. So we're taking a step back from automated driving. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But the experiment was basically that she asked a group of people about 4 types of robots: walking, jumping, rolling, floating, how similar they were to humans. And without surprise, floating is the most different because it doesn't have legs. It's the least anthropomorphic. And another part of the experiment was in each situation to rank how the robot was socially accepted, whether he would be invited, ignored, attacked, or excluded. And the result of that was that the floating one, the one that was looking the least like a human, was also the most likely to be accepted by the group because it would less be compared to a human. And as a robot can do less things than a human in this comparison scale, it would be a walking robot, for instance, considered as inferior. So taking the robots away from this comparison universe would favor their social adoption. And this example is here for a reason, because I think, Isabelle, it echoes with the results of the qualitative research you conducted, right?
Yes, Mark, thank you for sharing this recent research. It does echo indeed with our results, because when talking about comparison universe, we did see that wording has a strong influence on framing people's perception and anchoring a comparison universe, which in the end even questions the mere concept of what an autonomous vehicle is or could be. So, for example, we saw that when people were prone to talk about automated vehicles with intellectual and emotional terms, such as intelligence, autonomy, self-driven, self-driving, it drives the comparison to human driving, where you have a strong need for trust in the person in charge. And this was a barrier to adoption because, as you mentioned in this other research, comparing the machine to a human actually doesn't play in favor of adoption for people. Whereas on the contrary, when people were prone to have this comparison universe about mechanical, technological, lexical fields, talking about the machine, the system, artificial, robotism, they were prone to compare it to existing automated transports such as metro lines that are deemed, for example, more trustworthy than human-driven lines, for example. So this was a strong lever to adoption.
Okay, so the comparison universe plays in favor against the adoption. You also told us about the road regulation universe. Can you elaborate on how important it is?
Well, to put in the more larger context of what we did with this research is that we were able to identify 4 categories to sort out the different criteria that we identify impacting adoption, whether it's a high or lower impact. So there was the structural context, individual attitudes and uses. These 2 categories were the 2 main impacting adoption, or at least the more important for respondents. Then we identify the automated vehicles conception and the automated vehicles actions. Those are our 4 categories. Now, if we go back to the structural context, we talked about the comparison universe, which has a high impact when favoring adoption. And so do the current traffic regulations, and more precisely, the attitude towards these current traffic regulations that also have quite an impact when favoring adoption.
Okay, so if attitude towards this regulation have an impact, Lucy mentioned earlier that there were different type of car drivers,
Sure.
notably hedonic profiles. How does this road regulation context, that is very strong, clash with hedonic motives, let's say?
Sure. Well, we saw that there is a varying level of adoption depending on the structural context, even more precisely when we think about the current traffic regulation and legislation. So, for example, a strict traffic regulation that makes it more restrictive and less fun to drive around the city will favor adoption, because when you think about hedonic drivers, when you make it less fun for them to drive around the city, they will be more likely and more prone to delegate the driving function. So, for example, one tech enthusiast said to us, "I used to like driving, but I don't like it in Paris anymore. You're more defensive when you're driving now than when you're having fun. It makes sense if you can drive respecting the limits, but not at 50 kilometers per hour." So that is actually, regulation is actually a strong lever to cut down on the hedonic motives of drivers, actually. Because on the contrary, a permissive traffic regulation that makes it easy for cars to drive around the city will make hedonic drivers more likely to want to keep the driving function because they are still able to have fun. So, for example, this take moderate said to us, I have to say, for me, this autonomous driving is also completely stupid when I'm on the highway and the highway is open, because that takes the fun out of driving for me. So they wouldn't want to delegate the driving function to a machine if they still can enjoy it. If we go back to Lucy's driving profiles, for example, a utilitarian driver will be more likely to delegate this driving function because it's not about fun, it's about just utility and day-to-day uses. So on the contrary, they would be happy to delegate this driving function. So that is actually a strong lever to cut back on hedonic drivers through regulation.
Okay, so from what I understand, it's not just that there are hedonic drivers and it's not just about individual profiles, but the context can make also a situation fun or unfun. So this also needs to be taken into account when we talk about adaptation. That's very interesting. Is there any attitude in particular, other than the relation to driving, you'd like to mention?
Sure. Well, we had these 4 categories. We've shared some elements about the structural context. But when it comes to individual uses and attitudes, which was a very impactful category when favoring adoption, we have some levers that we also want to share. One of them, a primary lever that we identify, is the easiness of representation. Because today we're talking about automated vehicles, like it's common sense and we all know what it is, but we actually met people who didn't know what it was. So basically when we were asking them, okay, now if I say to you an automated vehicle, what do you think about? What comes to your mind? A few said that they didn't know what it was. And so being able to have a clear representation and to really envision in your mind what it is, what it could be, is actually very important. Is it very familiar in your own close and real world? Is it just common or recognizable? But if it's unfamiliar or even unknown, here it is a strong barrier, obviously, to adoption as it is unknown. So a secondary lever associated with this former one is how valued this representation is. And here we have a clear insight is that real-world imagery has more impact than sci-fi imagery. But it's positive or negative. When thinking about sci-fi, people talking about sci-fi, when it comes to representation, it's less familiar, obviously, than the real-world imagery. So they mentioned Knight Rider or Academy K2000 in France for the positive imagery. When thinking about negative sci-fi imagery, obviously they were thinking about thrillers or horror movies such as Spielberg's Duel or John Carpenter's Christine. But again, real-world imagery has more impact than sci-fi. And when it comes to real-world imagery, Tesla was clearly the brand that was the most mentioned spontaneously. Again, it's a qual research, but that really was seen across the 3 countries where we conducted the research. Tesla, whether it's positive when we think about the communication stunts, such as Elon Musk announcing the launch of autopilot, driving himself in the car, which drives positive communication mentions, even though we know that they don't always comply with legal requirements or safety compliance. But in the negative, it's also placed for the negative real-world imagery, because then the people were prone also to think about the Tesla crashes and accidents that also gain a lot of media traction and bad buzz. So that plays both as a positive and a positive lever, but also as a barrier to adoption. So the familiarity to current representations clearly favors car makers, and more specifically the brands leading the conversations, even though it can be both positive and negative. And here we think about Tesla, as it was the brand that was most associated and the most easily associated with autonomous vehicles by the respondents in our qual.
That's quite clear. Maybe we have some question before we go on to the next part.
I confirm, Mark.
Yes.
We have some questions.
Maybe we can have a break to go over a couple of them.
Sure.
One question is, how does trust is humans driving change interest for automated cars?
So I think that refers to a slide that was here. So when we talked about comparison to human driving and the strong need for for trust in the person in charge. Indeed, yes, this was something that that was very segmenting the trust to human driving, whether it's the own driving or other people's driving. It's something that we deep dived on in the analysis. We're not going to go too much into it today, but I don't know, Isabelle, if you want to say a couple of words about it.
Well, when it comes to human driving, it was part of the individual attitudes and uses, the criteria that we identified within this category. We had, when we talk about the trust towards human driving, there are two aspects. There is first the trust towards one's own driving. How do I trust myself as a driver? And also the trust towards others driving. How do I trust others on the road? So we saw that driving others on the road, people were prone to think they were good drivers, quite naturally. But when it came to trusting other people's driving, that was a more complex question, especially when we asked people if they were themselves driven sometimes, if they were just passengers. And we saw that it was a complex matter because some people were really prone to keep or to want to keep the control when being in a vehicle, so driving themselves rather than having even the closest people driving for them, whether they were their partners or their family members. So people were not prone to trust other humans on the road and prone to think that the danger was coming from others rather than themselves.
Okay, thanks, Isabelle. You said, Lucy, there were two questions. Is there another question?
There was one. There's two new ones. First one is the sample gathers the three capitals for the results. Do the results differ if we consider each capital separately?
Maybe to answer that one, there are some specific points, but it's very specific. I don't think we had that many differences locally. Maybe the difference was more on the road regulation context. Maybe that was the biggest one, because I think Isabelle, Varsovers did not have the same experience in their hometown driving than Parisians and Berliners.
Yes. Well, when we analyzed the results from the different fieldworks, as Lucy mentioned, we recruited people based on attitudinal elements and attitudes and uses. So even, for example, a tech moderate in Paris would be close to a tech moderate in Germany and in Poland. Obviously, there are cultural differences. For example, the level of tech savviness is not always the same between countries. For example, in Germany, tech savviness is much higher than in France and Poland. But as Mark said, yes, the results are quite the same among countries. And when it comes indeed to current road regulation compared to Berlin, in Paris, in Warsaw, people were not so eager to say that it was not fun anymore, or that they felt the need or that they would that they had trouble getting around the city driving.
And another question. Yes, I think you can see it now on the screen. Have you investigated the impact of communication at group level, not ground level? Example for VW group or Stellantis group.
What we mentioned about Tesla is really something that came up spontaneously. We did not deep dive on specific groups, or this was something that was really mentioned highly because Tesla is leading the conversation. And that's a fact. We are well aware that if you take groups such as Mercedes, they're further ahead in terms of the technology. They were accredited level 3 in the US. Tesla still hasn't gone through that. So we are aware that the perception from the respondents is due to basically a level of awareness, and there are a lot of problems with Tesla. answering the key requirements from the European Commission. This is something that was brought up by our partner BSC, that in terms of ethical requirements, they failed on many. So just to say, we did not deep dive on some groups, not Stellantis, not BMW. What came up was something that was brought up by the respondents. What we say, though, about car makers here, that the representations favor car makers. It doesn't only favor Tesla, because if you're familiar with automated vehicles, you are also more if you are familiar with ADAS, you're gonna weight innovation more from, let's say, car makers than other type of industrial. But we're gonna get into that about who this change is expected from in a minute. But we didn't ask about groups, or because keep in mind, these are car drivers. We didn't recruit them on their knowledge of each groups, etc. So it wasn't specifically mentioned. So that's for this question. And for the previous one about the specificities per country, the choice was also made not to deep dive too much into that first, because there are not that many differences, but also because they are going to be covered in a quantitative research with a much larger sample that will allow representativeness.
And I don't know if you have time for another question, Mark. In which way your results are linked with the recently displayed Improving Acceptability of Social Robots article?
Oh, this introduction was made to talk about what we call in the research the comparison universe. So what do you compare a robot or the driving delegation to? In the case of this research, it is to see how close to a human a robot is. The floating one is the one that is most away from a human, meaning that the group will not compare the robot to a human. So if there is no comparison between a robot and a human, this means that you cannot say this robot is inferior to a human. And it's the same with driving delegation. If you think of driving delegation as autonomous driving rather than automated, and that's why we're trying not to say too much autonomous, but it's quite hard because it's really printed in our heads. But we should talk more about automated than autonomous, because autonomous gives the idea that there's a will. There's no necessarily intelligence because it's programmed. So this is why the link is really between this first section that Isabelle presented about the comparison universe, about encourage, to what do we compare driving delegation? Do we compare it to human driving, or to automated transport that is already existing, that is more correct in terms of what the machine can and cannot do? This is why we had this introduction. But I think that's good that we had this question to make sure that it was clear for everyone that we started off with this as an introduction for the comparison universe. Maybe we can move on. As there are 20 minutes left. I still have actually 3 questions for Isabelle, and we can keep the rest of the question for the end. So when we talk, and this also to link it with the question from about the groups and what brands are behind it, we turned also the discussion turned a lot about the usage. And I'd like to know, Isabelle, how would the car be used? Was it more imagined as a shared or personal vehicle?
Well, to answer that, it's not so much about is it shared, is it personal, but first, what do people envision themselves doing with this vehicle? As you said, it's about the usage. Here we saw that the levers favoring adoption, the usage envisioned were about redefining what you can do in a vehicle. For example, people imagine business functions. It could be a moving workstation, a co-working space, for leisure. It could be also a space built for entertainment. People were quite creative when imagining what they could do in it. Some even imagined that they would have their own personal car parked outside of their home, and they could have an extra room, their own personal living room, just sitting outside of their house. So all these uses actually redefine what you can do in a vehicle, and they move away from the mobility function that we all know today. So we see here that the barriers to adoption when it comes to uses all revolve around the mobility function, whether it's for business, a corporate work shuttle, or a shared mobility solution or private chauffeur. So first and foremost, what we saw is that thinking about autonomous vehicles and what you can do with it is a way to redefine the function of a vehicle. And now when it comes to whether it's more a personal or a shared mobility solution, obviously people would rather have a personal car. The first level was to have it owned because that's the model that they know already today. And a second lever would be a personal, and here it is the most important insight, individual taxi. Because when people think of an autonomous vehicle, they think, okay, so there's no driver. If there's no driver, that means there's no one. So what if I get assaulted? What if it's a taxi? If it's a shared taxi, what if strangers come in? What happens? What would be the levers to ensure safety? Well, the first lever people can think of is having their personal own car to feel safer, or have it an individual taxi. If it's a shared taxi, at least they would want to have the option to share it or not. And we saw that if it's a shared public shuttle or personal taxi with mandatory sharing, then that these uses were strong barriers for people, as they want this place obviously to feel safe and to feel secure and free to go wherever they want. And when comparing to public transportation, for example, the benefits of an automated vehicle for them would be to have all the benefits of a personal car with the liberty of a public transportation, for example. So, but individual, again, that's the main insight here.
To be clear, that's not necessarily what was recommended by previous projects. So this is not something that would be necessarily sustainable, but it's good to know that at least this is what would be a lever for adoption among current car drivers. That's a question that's been raised a lot over the past year in the context of AI overall, and it's something that also led to a recent conflict at the head of OpenAI. I'm sure the audience has heard about it. When we talk about regulation, that is a hot topic on AI. Anything they shared when asked about it? Maybe it wasn't mentioned spontaneously, but I think you maybe asked them specific question about it.
Well, when it comes to what was mentioned spontaneously, as I mentioned, we had respondents who had already trouble figuring having clear representation of what an automated vehicle could be. So when thinking about regulation, spontaneously, that was a complex topic to bring about and to talk about. But regulators do have a strong identified role for road regulation. The European Union was mentioned quite a few times. We'll go back on that. But not so much in the deployment and making of these attached automated solutions. So when it comes to the type of governing bodies, a collaboration of GAFAM and traditional car manufacturers was the main lever favoring adoption. People relying on the expertise they know from these economic players, GAFAM for the software part and traditional car makers for the hardware part. Collective transport operators were mentioned as well when thinking about collective transportation. Whereas GAFAM only or traditional car makers only were more in the barrier part when thinking about adoption. So that was for the governing bodies when it comes to making automated vehicles. Now, when it comes to regulation, as you mentioned, Mark, it's a complex subject, and so spontaneously there was low impact on adoption because that was not the main concern for respondents, as it was more complex ideas to talk about. So it was not that obvious for respondents, but obviously it's important to support the European Commission's ethical guidelines. So functions attached to data design, algorithm, vehicle design, and the governance related to those aspects were not mentioned spontaneously by most respondents. But you're right, we did prompt it on these issues. And when prompted, the issue of governance is tackled in different ways by respondents, and they had things to say about it. So the first idea here is the necessity for new regulation. Some respondents were able to envision that an innovation such as automated vehicle would need new regulation as well to accompany its deployment. It was perceived by a few respondents and the need for global regulation because people were able to envision themselves, well, if I am able to drive or to be a passenger in an automated vehicle within my city, what happens if I change cities, if I travel, if I change countries? Then I will need a global regulation to make sure I can travel safely and freely. So one take just said there would probably be a new ministry for vehicle autonomy in Poland. It will also be good if some supranational common standards were implemented for these cars, such as at the European Union level. So again, the European Union was mentioned quite a few times as a legitimate and relevant actor to regulate on this issue. And the more global the regulation would be, the more impact and the more favorable people would feel about adopting autonomous vehicle. The second idea here is the human learning in parallel to machine learning. People were, in any case of interaction, in human-machine interaction, there is a learning part, not just the machine learning part, but human learning, how humans will be able to interact with these new tools and these new objects. So people were able to figure or to imagine that they will need trainings, not just as passengers, but also for pedestrians and cyclists. So one taking to just said, there should be training for pedestrians, for cyclists on how to behave in relation to such cars. There will need to be a huge lesson in changing habits. We need to start teaching children because it will already be difficult for us to switch. So here there was really the need for people to feel, well, again, a lack of awareness for some about tech, about autonomous vehicles. So they will need to get to know the vehicle, to understand how it works, to be able to feel safe and secure in it. Another tech moderate said, depending on the different circumstances, especially in the city, try it with different environments. I would say for this kind of vehicle, you would have to take a test again or do 1 or 2 hours of adaptation. So here, adaptation will be key in human learning. Was obviously a strong lever for people to be able to feel safe in such vehicles and to envision themselves using them.
Okay, so thanks, Isabelle. That was very interesting. Maybe we have any questions or some more reactions from the audience.
You have one additional question, two questions. First one, is there any local difference in regulation between the cities or countries?
I think maybe in Germany, typically the data privacy question is more is culturally there's a cultural difference in Germany about it. Maybe Isabelle, you want to say a word about it?
Not much to add. Just yes, in Germany, data privacy was mentioned spontaneously, but by some respondents. Also, well, as we mentioned, responding to another question later on, sooner, indeed, in Germany, tech savviness is more present. So people are more also aware of this data privacy concerns. So it emerged more spontaneously and in a way that was more qualified than we encountered in France and in Poland.
Okay.
Even if I'm right, Isabelle, we couldn't consider it as a real barrier or lever. Even if it was more mentioned in Germany, it remained something that we had to prove on. Another question. Will this session discuss the potential ethical implications of AI-powered vehicles when there are incidents such as a crash? Who takes the blame? The OEM, the insurance company, or the person acting as a passenger in the car?
That was something that was not that mentioned. I think we had some mentions though about it, Isabelle.
Yes.
But accountability is not anything that has to do with legal overall. And this is why also there's a need not only for research on car drivers, vulnerable road users, but also more research and discussions with regulators and those who have the power to take action. But Isabelle, on accountability, I think it wasn't that mentioned, but maybe you can elaborate.
Yes, it was mentioned by a few respondents. If I remember well, tech moderates mostly who would be worried about what happens if there's a crash, an accident. We didn't probe so much on who would be to blame, but it was more of a concern raised by respondents. Is it the passenger? Is it the car maker? Is it the insurance company? So it was. It remained a question. We don't have a specific answer towards what people would want. Who would be accountable? Who would be the more relevant actor to be accountable for people? It was a concern that was raised indeed.
I think we don't have any more questions.
So we're 5 minutes away to conclude. One thing we wanted to say to close the discussion today is that we conducted the desk research, a qualitative research that was just presented to you today. Now the next step for us, and we're currently working on the methodology, which is a very important phase ahead of the data collection. We're currently working on the methodology of a quantitative research that we are looking forward to presenting you. It will be the following part of the research project in the first semester of 2024. And the focus will be on levers and barriers that will best improve diversity and inclusion. And this is to jump back on what Arno said at the beginning. We do this for the European Commission, and the goal for us at the end is to communicate some recommendation to the European Commission, specifically on diversity and inclusion. And this is why the quantitative research will be conducted on levers and barriers that we identified that raise the most interesting questions and that have not been that explored so far. So we're currently working on that, and we'll be happy to present you the results of this next phase.
There is an additional question, Mark.
Yeah.
What measures can be implemented to ensure that AI algorithm in connected and automated mobility systems are transparent and accountable, especially in scenarios involving critical decision making?
The transparency is a question that is dividing a lot right now, because a lot of hardware and you know the behind the machine learning there's what we can call a black box. There's a lot of discussion on how can we explain how it works without looking at the program, because it would be impossible in terms of volume, the volume of data that is transmitted to the machine to train it. So there are models, some members of the consortium are working on it, models to explain without explicitly writing everything that the machine is doing. So the transparency issue is really a strong one, and is complicated to address. It's also an issue that needs to address in terms of marketing, because what Isabelle mentioned, the Tesla leading the conversation, it leads the conversation because in 2014, so 9 years ago, it launched an autopilot that is not really driving itself, unlike Elon Musk said in the interview. And there are concerns about what some researchers called autono washing, which is the parallel to greenwashing, the idea that some car makers will claim that what they do is autonomous when it's not, and when it needs training that is not planned from both human and the machine. So this is about transparency. There's clear, let's say recommendation is really to maybe put some rules around it, and also keep working on the explainability of the programs. And as for accountability, that's a more legal problem, and there are also some works that are being conducted by BSc on the topic. We're much more focusing on ethical and social control aspects. So in terms of accountability, there's also a need for a stronger regulation on that aspect. So maybe that's, I don't want to be too long either. I see that it's half already. Maybe there's another question, maybe a last one, or we
No.
can close it.
No more question.
Mark, if you allow me, I would like just to say a few, very briefly, a few words of conclusion. So first of all, I see this human-centered AI approach that you have taken in order to interview and to question the European citizen as a very interesting and very wise way to do it. And I would like to really thank you for that. I think this is really what we want in the AI for CCAM project. As you know, there is this AI regulation coming from the European Commission and also all the European countries, which is the AI Act. And of course, it will have very strong implications for automated driving in Europe. But I would like just to mention that the levers for adoption that you found in this study are really in line with this human-centered AI approach that Europe has taken, and that's excellent. And I take those levers for adoption as takeaway messages. Being myself an applied AI research scientist, I think this is very relevant and very useful in order to develop AI models dedicated to automated driving, so that we can have in mind what are the implications of the decision that are taken by the models we develop. So thank you very much for the findings, the presentation of those findings, and I really look forward to seeing the rest of the study.
So I think we can close it now on these words. Thanks everyone for attending, and have a great day, and see you in 2024.